tell me a little bit about the growth to 200, your talent strategy, and where you've seen your biggest challenges and maybe mistakes in that growth.
I mean, the employee count has grown organically over the last many years,
Mhm.
and we've really put an emphasis on training management and the leadership at every level. And there's a lot of levels now, and and I think that's the best thing we can do because
Mhm.
leadership is what can set the tone and the standards for
That's
everybody
right.
else beneath them. And sometimes I think companies will just hire someone that they think is competent enough
Mhm.
and just put all the trust and expectations. And then they're obviously frustrated very quickly thereafter
Mhm.
that the person isn't pulling their weight as they continue to scale.
Mhm.
And it's usually not the management's fault. It's their leadership's fault for not
Mhm.
investing deeper in them as leaders. And one of the things that we didn't always do well, but I think we're doing really well with now is creating talent density. And this
Mhm.
is I read it in Reed Hastings' book
Mhm.
about Netflix,
Mhm.
and I know they're going through ups and downs right now, but
Mhm.
I don't think anyone's poo-pooing $85 billion company that
Yeah.
took out
Mhm.
Blockbuster. So
Mhm.
no matter what their stock does in any given week.
Yep.
But that book is really powerful, by the way. And one of the biggest messages, takeaways I got from it was about building talent density,
Mhm.
because there's there's a nature of people basically kind of dropping to the lowest standard on that team, kind of the weakest link concept.
Mhm.
But everyone becomes that weak link. And what happens is let's just talk about an engineering team. If you have 10 engineers and seven of them are super talented, hardworking, incredible engineers, but you bring on three very subpar, lazy, critical, kind of energy sucking engineers,
Mhm.
what'll happen is those three engineers won't raise to the level of the other seven. What happens is the seven will stoop down and drop to the level of the three because they don't feel, well, why should I work so much harder? These guys are at this level. Why am I putting in all this extra time and work in it? Why does it matter? We're all part of this team. And
Mhm.
so what happens is it averages down, not up. And so that's a mistake too. People say, "Oh, I'm gonna raise the standards of my average team by bringing out some superstars." It
Right.
actually doesn't work super well. What you have to do, unfortunately, is get rid of average people,
Mhm.
kindly and respectfully, with nice
Right.
severance. Um, and by the way, those average people might be superb in other companies and other roles. Usually, it's a
Correct.
wrong person, right, wrong
Yep.
seat kind of thing,
Yep.
or right
Yep.
person, wrong seat kind of situation. And it's about building density. And what happens is, let's just say you only have a team of seven super solid engineers. They will produce the same as 15 or 20 average engineers.
No, I mean, that's not
And they
epiphany.
start to elevate each other, almost compete with one another about
Mhm.
who's more amazing and
Right.
who can do more. So talent density is key to scaling without losing
Mhm.
control of the organization.
Right. Well, and it's interesting to look at it that way. I look at it more from a standpoint, because yes, he grew a multi-billion-dollar company, but he maybe early on he was, but overall he wasn't on the front lines of how are we, who are the people we need and how are we finding those, right?
Yeah.
And what I would say is, and you've already talked a little bit about this, is putting the emphasis, on training, management, and leadership, because leadership sets the tone, right? And there's no question about that, right? If your leadership is not fully aligned, you can't build a town strategy that'll support what you're doing. It's not possible.
The
So,
other thing
so
I'll add,
yeah.
I'm sorry, Carol.
No, go ahead.
Uh, The other thing I'll add that plays into that is a culture of transparency. And I understand maybe that's not as possible or even worth doing necessarily in every single company to every degree. But in our case, we have taken the approach of complete transparency
Hmm.
with our employees, because we want them to understand how the company is doing. We want them to feel like stakeholders.
Hmm.
They're all
Hmm.
literal stakeholders. We give
Hmm.
stock to every
Of
employee.
course. Yep. Yep.
So
Yep.
we want them to feel like owners and be empowered like owners to understand when we're doing well, when we're not doing so well, what those challenges are, when we have to make big decisions, tough decisions, layoffs, whatever it could
Hmm.
be over years. they more understand, they better understand and aren't surprised because they understand, oh, well, things weren't going well for this long and here in this department. And actually, I respect their decision to make a change, as opposed to, oh, I can't believe they don't care about people and they just let people go. That's just one example, right? Of
Mhm.
if you're behind a curtain and don't understand why decisions are being made versus understanding where people are coming from because they're really looking out for the entire organism of the company, which is made up of them as well. So transparency is key. At our monthly all hands, we share revenue numbers, we share cash positions, we share investments, we share all sorts of things. Anything that we can, without compromising, HR violations. But we share as much as we can
Right.
with our team, and I think that builds trust, accountability,
Mhm.
and ultimately alignment
Yep.
for what's to come.
Mhm. So if you look at the over the last, 9.5 years, the turnover you have experienced, because of course everybody does experience turnover, what would you say were the causes of that?
I'll ultimately blame myself for any of it,
Okay.
and that's because I, in the past, failed to invest more in certain managers,
Yeah, very smart.
or
Mhm.
I put people up. I almost not purposefully, but I may have set people up to fail.
Mhm. Mhm.
An amazing salesperson is not necessarily going to make an amazing sales director.
That's
Or you know what I mean? And I see this
I
over
do.
and over and over again. An
Yeah.
incredible marketing, kind of doer uh,
Mhm.
uh, is not necessarily an incredible CMO.
Right.
Um, they could be, and I love giving people opportunity, but it doesn't always, one doesn't always mean the other.
Mhm.
And
Right.
so I've made that mistake. I've made the mistake of not taking certain things more seriously, of not listening to concerns quicker,
Mhm.
and letting them bubble up to the point where they boil over. And so I ultimately blame myself because I would have to say in almost every single situation where there was turnover, um, there's something that could point back to something we can learn from it or do better in the future. And I think that's the approach we take today. And now at our executive meetings, which we have every single week with my entire executive leadership, one of the topics we talk about every week is was there any voluntary turnover? Um, it's really rare today. I mean, we see 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, and every now and then, oh, one, and we discuss it. Anytime there's a one, or rarely a two, very rare, we'll discuss it and we'll really try to figure it out. And we don't just discount it and say, oh, well, they just weren't a fit. Maybe that's the truth, but
Mhm.
we will still discuss it and understand
Right.
it and make sure that we're not missing anything else, that we can do better as a company. Ultimately, I take my responsibility immensely, because of two things. One, I'm responsible for the livelihood of hundreds of people now, and they have families and they have kids and they have dreams of their own, and that's a responsibility I take seriously. And secondly, people spend more time at work than at home if you really think about it.
Right.
Um, and you're at work for 8 hours, you get home at 5 or 6, and you go to sleep at 10. That's less hours than you're at work.
Right.
I mean, we're not counting sleep here. So if you think about it, making work an enjoyable, passionate place
Mhm.
to live your life is a responsibility I think leaders should take more seriously than just they're here to make their paycheck and leave. No, I mean, this is where they live most of their life,
Mhm.
and we can't ignore that. It's important.
So, when you discover that somebody leaves voluntarily, is it something that could have been avoided had you known about it sooner?
A lot of the time, absolutely,
Okay. So
absolutely.
so then my question is, would you say, if I made you put yourself on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the lowest, 10 being the highest, that you have a culture of feedback, where would you put yourself on that scale?
Today, it's a 10. Today, it
Right.
wasn't always. We have
Okay.
quarterly surveys now for the whole company. We survey the entire company to get a pulse. We have built-in feedback
Mhm.
one-on-ones with managers and their direct reports
Mhm.
every month. I mean, it's now part of our consistent process.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, that's not to say we're never going to have turnover, but I don't know how much more transparent we can get. We have open Slack channels. I am a very accessible CEO.
Mhm.
We have office
Awesome.
hours once a
Yep.
month where, virtual now, but office hours where people can come on, ask any questions, raise any concerns. And I do have people who, maybe someone 3 levels down from an org chart perspective that will Slack me with a concern.
Yep.
And I don't think a lot of companies have that. I'm very proud that we have that. Extremely proud.
Mhm.
It's helped us avoid crises in the past,
Yep.
because someone was able to speak out, and feel confident enough to do so.
Mhm.
So I think that's important.
I agree, and I would also agree with that most companies do not have a culture of feedback, right? And I mean, there are many factors that go into why people leave, and like I said, it all really boils down to leadership alignment and building a town strategy to support it. But um, without that culture of feedback, which is of course part of your town strategy, right? uh, yeah, you're going to lose people because they don't feel like they can talk to their direct manager, or what if they do say something to the direct manager and that person doesn't do anything about it, and now I don't have any access to somebody who actually can potentially make
Yeah.
a change, right?
One other thing we implemented a couple years ago was something called skip levels, which is basically just like it sounds.
Right.
For what you just said, uh, it's hard for someone to complain to their manager about their manager. If you think about that,
Well, depending on the relationship, right? I mean, if
depending
people
on
are
the
trained
relationship.
properly, you can do it. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But to secure against any potential filtering to the top
Hmm.
from
Hmm.
that manager of any
Yep.
feedback at the bottom, we've implemented skip levels where every employee also gets interviewed by the person above that manager.
Direct manager.
And it's
Yep.
not to get dirt on the manager, it's to
Uh-huh.
just hear feedback from the customer. How's everything? It's not all meant to be about the manager, but it's to really understand one level higher. How's everything going? What can we be doing? Is there a
Hmm.
concern with your manager? That's the opportunity to bring it up, and allows us to take those lessons or feedback and figure out how to either train people up,
Hmm.
give that manager a little more feedback or direction or training, to support them. It's not about tattletelling; it's about supporting each other. And at
Right.
Verse, at least, we built a culture of one team, and we're all rowing in the same direction, and
Mhm.
we're a big ship. I may be a captain, but
Mhm.
I can point the boat anywhere. But it's not going to go unless someone's,
Yep. Yep.
putting fuel in the back and steering
Mhm.
and making sure everything
Mhm.
else is working fine. So it takes everyone to move the ship.
Carol Schultz here. Thanks for watching this excerpt from Authentically Successful. The conversation doesn't end there. So if you want to hear this episode in full and all my conversations with many other successful founders and CEOs, please visit verticalelevation.com/podcast.